Hey, FFR listeners. If you love getting to listen in on our convos each week, consider helping us keep bringing our signature brand of feminist pop culture analysis to you by joining our Patreon community at patreon.com/femfreak. You can get early access, exclusive bonus episodes, participate in AMAs, join our friendly Discord server, and more. That's patreon.com/femfreak. See you there.
I love the moments where we see exactly what the attitude of this film is to U.S. immigration officers when Grace asks the CPS agent, where do you keep the prisoners? And the woman says, well, we call them detainees. And Grace smacks the shit out of her. I knew right then I was on board for whatever this film had to say.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by Ebony Adams, a technologically augmented superwoman sent from the future to protect Carolyn Pettit, the hero of the podcast resistance movement.
Fuck, I'm going to get killed off in the first 5 minutes.
Come on, come with me if you want to live, Caro.
Are you wearing sunglasses, Ebony?
Yeah.
Hell yeah. This week, we're gearing up and heading to the border to talk about the latest entry in the Terminator franchise. Are Sarah and John Connor enjoying a well-earned rest somewhere? Or does the forecast call for more murder showers? Because it's raining future robots! Stay tuned and find out.
Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun.
Wow. Keep that in, Rob.
Definitely keep that in. That was perfect. Hello, ladies.
Hey.
Hello.
How's everyone doing?
Gotta admit, I'm tired, but I'm good. Happy to be talking to you two.
Yeah. I'm a little nervous about this episode.
Oh,
Why?
don't be nervous. I mean,
I don't know. I tweeted some shit, and Carolyn was like, "Oh, I love this movie.
No,
this is the best
but I
movie
mean,
ever made."
You have the dominant opinion. I mean, most people are going to walk out of this movie thinking that was not very good. I know that I'm in the minority, being like, "Oh, this movie is super interesting," and really.
Oh, you're not remotely in the minority there, Caro. I posted in Slack. I cannot wait to talk about this.
All right.
Oh boy. All right. Well, I guess we're just getting into this bullshit. All right. I am now going to read the very extremely long intro that Ebony wrote for us this week.
Oh, boy.
Terminator Dark Fate is the sixth entry in the wibbly-wobbley, timey-wimey cinematic universe originally brought to life by James Cameron in 1984. The franchise has taken a lot of detours over the past 35 years, some more successful than others, but the supporting infrastructure of the story has never really changed. Sometime in the future, the machines turn on and wage an all-out war that leaves billions dead and the planet a devastated wasteland. But there's a brave human resistance led by an incredibly inspirational white dude. So, in a truly bonkers effort to eradicate those pesky humans once and for all, the machine intelligence called Skynet sends killer cyborgs into the past to kill that human leader before he can grow into his destiny. The resistance is like, chill, bro, and sends their own dude back in time to prevent Skynet from succeeding. Lovely recap, Ebony. Thank you for that.
It captures all the high points, right?
It really does.
Yeah.
You did great. In the latest film, a lot of the accumulated mythos that was developed over the past 3 or 4 movies has been jettisoned entirely, and we've gone back to the beginning, and all of our old friends are along for the ride. But this time around, the protector sent back to save humanity is a woman, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator has relaxed into a comfortable semi-retirement when he's not running his drapery business. Oh, and Sarah Connor is back, and she's still kicking ass. Perhaps the most important thing about this film is that the hero that we're invested in, the one that must be protected at all costs, it's not a white woman who will birth the future leader of the human resistance. It's not the white dude himself. It's a young Mexican woman. Spoilers!
Mind blown.
You know what? There's so many things about this film that are on the nose, but whatever. I don't care. There's a lot about it that I loved.
Oh,
yeah, I mean,
God,
that was one of the
y'all,
things.
I'm gonna die. This is gonna be brutal.
Well, but again, Anita, remember, I have seen so many tweets and stuff
I
ridiculing
don't care.
this movie.
You're the people that I respect, though.
No, yeah, but this is by no means the first time this has happened, Anita. Where one of us has liked a movie that you've hated.
I mean,
not
okay,
on something this bad. Name another one that has been this horrifically bad that you've actually like. That's been, well, I'm sure it's existed.
I think any film that, like, if you go back over our past podcast history, look at the films that you think, oh my God, this was so shitty. Apart from like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I largely agree with you I disagree with you because I love everything. You know, it's only the occasional one where you're like, yeah, this is shitty. And I followed up and I'm like, yeah, you're right. This is shitty.
Fine, let's do this.
Well,
let's
so
have this conversation.
Since Ebony's intro brings us right to that, like, let's maybe start with that, like, because I was fascinated by the way that the character of Sarah Connor in this film has all of these assumptions that she herself, from her own experience and from the future that, you know, she was a part of that never came to pass, you know, or that her son that, you know, was connected to that never came to pass. So I found it fascinating the way that through her, this film seems to be in conversation with the assumptions that were built into not even just the earlier Terminator films, but into cinema, like more broadly, you know, mainstream cinema more broadly. At that time, it's like, of course, the hero's a white dude. Like, of course that, you know, that's what you're, you know, or not. And obviously in Danny's case, like not a white dude, but at least still a dude, right? Like that's where this is going. Like, I don't know. I just thought that was super interesting that she, Sarah, who herself is this heroic figure who has defied expectation, you know, and been kind of an icon in her own right, you know, kind of became the voice in a way of these old assumptions that this film exists in resistance to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, in a larger or not larger sense, but expanding on your point, there's always this kind of specter of the missing white dude in this film, right? So we expect that dude to exist, to be the focal point narratively of an action film like this. And so it's constantly being mentioned, not just, you know, the presumption that Danny is going to, you know, birth a hero, but that, you know, these films kind of demand that kind of central figure, right? And ultimately the film, like by never giving it to us, but by constantly mentioning it, sets up this kind of tension. Ultimately, I think they, you know, kind of refuse to go with it completely, and we do wind up getting the missing white dude. Like he appears in the end, right? You know, there's no spoiler. We all know Arnold Schwarzenegger shows up in this movie, and then, you know, what has been to that point for me a quite interesting film and quite sufficient without his presence, then allows Grace to be sort of really sidelined in a way that was just so disappointing to me. We'll get to that. But yeah, I think this film is asking a lot of, in fact, to me, not even asking these questions, but just sort of, you know, telling us you're expecting one thing and we're not giving it to you. And you need to wrestle with that, and it's going to make you uncomfortable. We're going to keep bringing it up.
Okay.
You don't have to agree, Anita. Tell me what you hated.
I don't think you're not wrong. And I don't think you're not wrong. Here's the thing. This movie is so badly written. The dialogue is atrocious.
The acting is not great either.
Nobody other than Mackenzie Davis can act, and Mackenzie Davis is barely chugging along with the dialogue that she's been given. Like, they can do all that they want to subvert this and that and the other, which they did, but it doesn't make it like... I think that today, at the point that we're at, in the expectations that we have around like more women and people of color and women of color as stars, as heroes, these subversions that we're having in media that we've been having over, I'd say, like the last 5 years or so, like this isn't a huge revelation. Although I think some people might still think it is. So to me, the revelation, like the fact that they were doing all this stuff is notable in that, you know, it's a Mexican woman that they very actively subvert, like the notion of Sarah Connor being like, oh, you're here to protect your unborn child. No, it's her. Whoa, didn't see that twist coming. Doesn't do justice to this film because it's so trash.
So, I mean,
I have such a hard time with all of it because it was so awful at every moment, except one line. Do you want to know the one line that I liked?
Yes.
Yes, I'm going to tell you. Someone asks Grace what she's doing, and she says, "Future shit."
Mm-hmm. That is a good
the
line.
Only line.
And
the
I
only
think
line I liked.
I think it is a very important point that like a movie doing these like whatever we want to call them,
social justicing,
things does not in and of itself make a movie good, right? Like, and so when I say that I think this movie is good, like I think it is, I mean that I think it is good, like not in spite of or not even regardless of those things, but I'm not saying that I think it's good because of those things alone. Like I think it is legitimately good.
I think if you asked me 5 or 6 years ago if this movie was valuable, I would have been like, yeah, even though it's garbage, it's a garbage movie. It's still important because we so rarely get this subversion to the white male hero. But I think today in our media landscape, it's just it doesn't mean as much.
So I'm not. I mean, so again, like we can, even if you dismiss these sort of social justice aspects of the film, like I'm interested. I think there's still enough substance and interesting stuff in what this film is doing to, I just want to declare that, like, I fully agree with you that we shouldn't say movies are good just because, they do like this bare minimum, whatever, again, social justice-y stuff, but also that like those are not the reasons, or those aren't the only reasons why I am saying that I think it is a
go
for
good
it.
Film. What are the other things you like about it?
I mean,
I thought I was queuing you up.
Well, go ahead,
Ebony. You wanted to say
Carolyn,
something.
I want to say that I have no interest in medicine movies. So movies that we should watch because, they are doing something that is, ostensibly healthful for us. Like I have very little patience for that. Also, listen, y'all, I'm broke as a joke. I don't try and spend my money to be, like to go just to get some sort of points from some hypothetical, social justice organization that, alt-writers are convinced exists. I think that the movies, the media that the three of us, consume, enjoy, participate in, etc., probably looks a lot different from some of the things that maybe an overwhelming number of other people enjoy, right? Like I know that the three of us, which is not to say we deserve halos or anything, but I think the notion of like a non-white, non-male hero, it shouldn't be revelatory. It should not accord you, a certain number of brownie points. And yet it still does. In the year of our Lord, 2019, it is still notable to have this.
I mean, it is true that there are people out there who are angry at, upset about, who dislike this film specifically because it is doing those things, right? That is also true. And as long as there are
Terminator franchise is notable. Like this is not some, kind of indie project that someone, made in their garage, filmed on their iPhone 6, right? Like this is a huge, culturally iconic franchise. And I mean, the notion that women are like strong women are suddenly being inserted into the cinematic universe for the first time is ludicrous. But nevertheless, what we get in this is something quite new.
I mean, I think we are still at a point where it's unfortunate that we are still at a point where this stuff is kind of noteworthy. And I don't think that makes the film good, but I also don't think we can discount it,
I mean, and in terms of things that I liked about the film, and then I'll throw it to you, Carol, because I know that you're going to have a much more compelling sort of roundup of the things that, you were interested in. No, but I thought the action sequences, I think we could have shaved off one or two, but I think the action sequences in this film were actually incredibly well done. I found myself like completely wrapped. Mackenzie Davis is wonderful to watch in action. From the very beginning, the way that she moves her body and the way that the scenes were choreographed to sort of highlight like the length of her limbs and the power of, of her body. I found beautiful. I was never bored for a second watching her fight or, manipulate, like the momentum of someone. So that's one thing that I actually think was very well done.
I mean, there's an interesting observation in the review of this film by Walter Chaw, who's a critic I've mentioned on this podcast before, who I think always comes at cinema from a very interesting perspective. I disagree with him as often as I agree with him, but I always find him fascinating to read, where he says, the most memorable moment in T3 is when the evil Terminator inflates her boobs as a way of like distracting or, and in this, those scenes with Mackenzie, even in the first scene, she's like completely naked, and yet there's like it's all about, as Ebony was saying, like the kind of like the form of her body and the physicality of it, but without any like sexualization or nods to that whatsoever. And I mean, I just thought the way that Mackenzie Davis looked in this movie as an action, as a figure in kinetic action scenes, and the way, like when she's like wrapping that chain around her arm and stuff, like there are just images of her in this film that are like, maybe they deserved a better film, but they are nonetheless, to me, really outstanding action cinema imagery.
Absolutely. And there's never a moment where her skills are we call into question the efficacy of her kind of martial might, because she then tries to use like her sex appeal, the desire of others for her to achieve some sort of end, right? This happens all the time in movies like, I don't know, like the kind of Black Widowfication, right? So, a woman who is supposedly like an excellent fighter, completely, on the level of her male counterparts. Unlike them, there is always a scene in which she is forced to, use someone's attraction to her against them. And like her hotness is part of the point. And so we wonder, like, does it really matter if she's as strong as everyone else, because she always has this tool in her arsenal? And that's never the case here. Like, there's never a point where we see, some dude ogling her, or, her choosing to dress in a certain way to distract someone. It is always, as you say, like about her, like the kinetic power she possesses, her physical strength. It was absolutely, I loved it. I loved that about this, that we never got that kind of like tired trope of she's super, she's super badass. Oh, but she's also hot.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, yes.
Can we talk about Carl's drapes, please?
Oh my God.
Yes, we
can.
Like
a dirty
I
joke.
died.
Uh-huh.
I died.
So
when he goes into that whole spiel in the van or in that garage or whatever about they wrote this joke about Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator sort of retiring and like being in home decoration, like decor, and then going into this whole spiel about how like those aren't the right drapes for a girl's room. Like drapes should have balloons and butterflies and whatever on them. And like, I was like, oh, they're trying to write a joke. Oh, this is supposed to be funny. It's so awkward.
It's good. You know why I think that moment is good is because it makes Carl, it makes him specific. It makes him like somebody who has become a particular very specific person. Like he's no longer the mass-produced, like factory-issued, model that he once was. Like he has become an individual. I think, and he's got his expertise in this field, his job that he's done quietly for years. And I
hear you, but here's the thing about this whole movie is that like it was written by a fucking machine. It was like, cool, add the joke here, add the action sequence here, add this dialogue that was hyper predictable at every point. Like I I get what you're saying in that like there should be something like that, but nothing to me landed. It all felt so deeply like algorithmically contrived that I was like, cool, this is a movie and these are the pieces of the movie and like this is what you learn in film school or whatever, right?
Know, it's funny like, because I think a lot of the film was like, but that specific joke I thought was incredibly smart. And I loved it because to me, like, we've spent the past 2 hours, you know, like we hear Carl saying this, essentially saying like, you can't have solid colored drips for girls. Like you need something more girly, right? That's essentially what he's saying. We spent 2 hours with these badass women who completely give the lie to something like that. But of course, this machine, you know, the way that he would have been programmed would have been with this sort of like base level kind of like gender essentialism. You know, so to me, like, I thought it was a very smart joke that, of course, he's going to, you know, like that's part of his programming is going to be revealed in that way. And we will see the insufficiencies of that when placed up against like the reality of human women.
I think that there's some like thematic elements in this that in another movie I would have found very interesting. So one, I couldn't get over how bad Linda Hamilton is. Like, just every line out of her mouth, like she just, I don't know, can't deal with how bad of an actor she is in this movie. But the bits about her, and you talked about this at the beginning, the bits about her realizing, like making assumptions about who the savior is and being like, I know this story and I'm going to be here for you. And then the story gets flipped and she's like, oh, fuck. I also know this story and I'm going to be here for you, but in a different capacity. So instead of being like, you're me, it turns into you're my child. And I think that the relationship, thematic changes between that relationship in her brain is really interesting to me, but I thought it was, not in this movie.
I mean, I thought it was quite interesting that you have these people now from two different generations and from two different futures who now, like, because Danny's father is dead, right? Sarah's son is dead, and they kind of, you know, they have this weird shared DNA of being like people from futures that one of them definitely isn't coming to pass. Good. The others we don't know yet, but I don't know, that unlikeliness of them uniting. But speaking of like thematic stuff that's interesting, I want to talk just a bit about like, so one thing that I loved about the T-1000 in T2 is the way in which he was like extremely intelligent, and as well as being this like ruthless killing machine, and that he sometimes knew how to use his intelligence to get good information or get what he needed. And I feel like the evil Terminator in this is really fascinating in that way that we can see him be very friendly at times to get the information he needs, like when he picks up from Danny's father. Everyone calls her Danny, like noted, and like that becomes obviously like a useful bit of information for him. But what I especially found interesting was the way in which he weaponized the technology and the manpower of the border.
Sake. That scene, I'm sorry, hold on a second.
Okay.
That scene where he like shoves his hands into the machine and then all of a sudden can track the train direction and all that, that's bullshit. I was like guffawing out loud.
Okay, I mean, yes.
In the theater.
Yes, okay, that is bullshit. I grant you that. That is some sci-fi bullshit. But
that's not how surveillance culture works. And everything else they're trying to be a little bit more realistic about. And oh God, that made me so mad. Anyways, please continue.
But I do. I mean, so there's a little exchange we get right where he's just basically murdered everyone in this detention facility right at the border, and these two like state troopers drive up, and he does this perfect like. I don't mind telling you boys, I prayed more in the past 15 minutes than I did my whole life. Like, he knows exactly what to say to get in good with those guys. And just so he ingratiates himself with them immediately, so that when he asks his next line, like, do you boys know where I can get hold of a chopper? Like, they are inclined to, they see him as like part of the system of that kind of, that whole American authoritative system where God and country and everything all become, one. And I don't know. I mean, it's such a little moment, but I thought it was so great. But just overall, I thought it was fascinating the way that he takes control of a drone and he weaponizes it in multiple ways. First, he uses its cameras and its surveillance capabilities, but then he also literally like crashes it into where they are, like all the ways in which he again weaponizes like the border infrastructure.
There's an interesting contrast to what you're talking about in terms of the like God and country and the fact that this takes place on the border. It starts in Mexico. They use a coyote to go cross the border, and then there's a detention center. Like, there's obviously a lot of thought put into like what are the issues today that can be highlighted or amplified by this film, this terrible, terrible fucking film.
Yeah, but
Right.
I think that going back to what you're saying, Kara, about the weaponization of these kind of state tools. He is only able to do that because that infrastructure already exists and has already been weaponized against a certain population.
Of course.
Right? Like he doesn't need to invent it. It's another thing that I found so welcome about this film is that it has, it absolutely indicts the ways in which certain state violence in general has already been deployed to do the kind of things that Skynet in past films, but Legion in this film, the new version of the machine AI, things that it's already doing. There are already undesirable populations who are being eradicated. It is simply that, the Rev 9 has gone back and is doing that to a single woman rather than to a broad community. But I love the moments where we see exactly what the attitude of this film is to U.S. like immigration officers when Grace asks the CPS agent, where do you keep the prisoners? And the woman says, well, we call them detainees. And Grace like smacks the shit out of her. I knew right then I was on board for whatever this film had to say.
But I also made a note at that moment, too, that she beats the fuck out of the people in the prison when she's supposed to be like, and that, I felt like she just beats the shit out of all of the people that work there when like she's just supposed to be helping Danny stay alive, right? And like one of the things that I loved about, I hear you that like there is a symbolism in the violence towards the people who perpetuate or are complicit in the violence against others, right? But one of the things I really loved about the Sarah Connor Chronicles, the show that was, 10 years ago, maybe more now, was that violence done on humans was a really big deal in that show. But violence done to Terminators weren't, right? So it wasn't a show without violence, but that like, when they hurt or killed another human, like they went to fucking therapy for it on the show. Like it was a really big deal. And that scene in particular felt very dismissive of the cost of violence in ways that felt more pronounced than in other scenes, which I think was just because like, cool, like a truck turns over, you don't actually see the humans getting hit in that or getting killed or hurt in that, which isn't any less bad, but it's not as physical.
I totally get what you're saying. And I absolutely need to unpack, the ways in which I'm saying, oh, the fact that you kick these dudes' ass is acceptable to me because they're in a uniform. But when you're, playing boggle on the highways and there's all that human collateral damage, I am more affected by that. Like Fast and Furious, I like the human cost in those car chases in action films. It's just astronomical. But it did. I did respond to it because I thought the film is absolutely saying yes, like you are complicit in a larger kind of apparatus, and if you are complicit, if you have chosen to position yourself in this place, then that does mean that you're going to be susceptible to certain kinds of dangers. And yeah, I absolutely need to unpack who I suggest is a fitting target for violence, but I will do that at a later date with my therapist. I will just say that, when it comes to action, we don't often get someone who is essentially on the side of, the brown people kicking ass and dismantling the
And that's the
specific
thing.
tools
And
that
I think,
are, set up against them.
I think that like a conversation about violence in media in general, like for us to do one episode might be interesting, because I think that this is a complicated thing. Like, I'm not a fucking pacifist by any means. And so I don't know why I said it like that. It's not wrong to be a pacifist, but I'm not a pacifist. Anyways, but the thing is, like, when is violence used and how is it used and why is it used? And like, what are the consequences of it are things that I'm constantly asking, right? So like, yeah, I feel like there's a little bit of a like, is it okay to punch Nazis question happening here? Which yes,
Yeah,
it is.
I was gonna
but
say,
at the same time, but at the same time, like that scene felt so gratuitous. Like I didn't actually read what you just put in. Like the analysis you just provided made me look at the scene differently, which is the whole point of critical analysis. But I didn't see it as that. I just saw it as like, get the fuck out of my way. Instead of just like, she could just leave. She didn't have to beat the shit out of every single person in that room.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Kara, what do you think?
I mean, I see both sides. No, I mean, I think Anita raises like a really important point about. I mean, I do think that our general discourse around violence right now, the whole, is it okay? Like, there's a certain reductiveness in the "is it okay to punch Nazis" conversation that doesn't ask like, I mean, if you are literally in a military, or if you're in a resistance situation where you absolutely have to resort to violence and you have to do harm to another human being, like you're probably not going to come away from that. You're going to come away from that feeling horrible, no matter how much that person may have like deserved it. I mean, if you have to be truly violent, I mean, I guess it depends, but it's like, I guess what I'm saying is certain things do get lost. Like violence is regrettable. It's regrettable that we should ever have to resort to violence. And if we do, like, we have to think about what the psychological and emotional costs are of that violence. And of course, action cinema is not really a place in which though that stuff can really be grappled with, because action cinema is all about the thrill and the excitement and sometimes the catharsis of seeing violence.
I would argue that the Sarah Connor Chronicles did it,
right?
which is in the same universe, right? Like which is really, and it's one of the only examples I can think of that actually like does that.
I mean, a television series might have more. I mean,
space,
not to excuse all action cinema, because we absolutely yes, but a television series might have more time to like engage with that stuff than a film does. But
100%.
But I mean, this is an important conversation that I think is not one that people really still don't want to have. Like you try to raise any concerns about like depict like glorification of violence and like the larger impacts of like the glorification of violence, and people just don't want to engage with there being any possibility that there's anything wrong with that, really. But I think we do at a certain point need to confront what's going on there.
All right.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about Grace?
Yeah.
I just saw the film a couple of days ago, so I have not had time to completely form my thoughts on this. But if you have, or someone who is working on a piece that is thinking through some of the things that is going on with a character like Grace, who is an augmented human, as part of the genre that also is comprised of characters like Lucy, played by Scarlett Johansson, or Alita from Alita Battle Angel, or even Pris from Blade Runner. I would love to read it. Hit me up at Ebony Aster on Twitter.
Fun fact: Mackenzie Davis was in the new Blade Runner.
Oh wow!
She was one of the little sex bots, but they weren't sex bots in that one.
I'm fascinated. I am absolutely fascinated by the ways that female-coded cyborgs, augmented humans, androids, etc., how they exist and how they are composed and shaped, like literally shaped in our visual media. One of the things that I loved about Mackenzie Davis in this role is that she is physically imposing. She is, at least in comparison to the other, people that she is on screen with, she is quite tall and she has very broad, powerful shoulders. And I absolutely, it's not something that we typically see with our female action stars. They typically still have although, they may have visible muscles in their arms or legs, for instance, nevertheless, there's a certain degree of softness and curviness that we often expect them to have. But I am really fascinated at the way this film and films like it, or that star characters like Grace, where they locate the source of humanity and the purpose of humanity and the human impulse. I think it's very interesting that it is in this film that we get the android who experiences a happy domestic life is Arnold, or a cyborg is Arnold, is not Grace. But yeah, I'm super interested in it. I'm also really interested in the way that the film, to my mind, kind of, I don't know, doesn't go as far as it could with Grace, in that what she represents as this badass, female superwoman, super soldier that comes back, it's kind of taken away from her, and that this planned obsolescence is built in, with the her seizures and the way her hyperaccelerated metabolism will cause her to essentially shut down. I don't know. I just felt like the film didn't want to go so far as to suggest that she was as implacable and undeniable as some of the past cyborgs that have come back.
So that's interesting. Okay. One, I know that in Blade Runner they're called replicants before anyone freaks out at me.
People are gonna freak out at my shit.
It's fine
because whatever. Robots, androids, cyborgs. I'm conflating them all. You recognize that I recognize them. They're not the same.
So thing. I didn't read. So, okay. Also, one piece of history that's important to note in terms of what you're talking about is that when Linda Hamilton played Sarah Connor in Terminator 2, that scene of her doing pull-ups in the hospital was the first time you saw a woman actually fucking ripped in film, right? You had superhero women, but they were all very slim and they weren't muscular at all. And so that was a really important moment, and part of the reason why Terminator 2 is so big in feminist film sort of canon. Mm-hmm. I didn't read Mackenzie Davis, or I didn't read Grace as that imposing. She's tall, but she wasn't very built. And so I think that the fact that she was augmented was really helpful in being able to be oh, you're not kind of this very thin, lanky person who just happens to be really strong and can beat the shit out of a Terminator, right? That she has augmentations to allow her that strength. The fact that she is fallible, I think is interesting in what you're getting at, right? Is that make her more complex? Does that make her character more interesting? Does it make it, you know what I mean? Does it add a level of tension that we wouldn't otherwise get? Does it make it so that she can't actually save the day and that Arnold
ultimately,
has to come
yes,
in and do it?
That's what it, for me,
right.
That's the way that it read, because it allowed for, the entry of Arnold Schwarzenegger later in the film to make a sort of narrative sense, that ultimately Grace is going to be physically incapable of dispatching the Rev 9. She's going to need assistance. That assistance is not going to be, is not going to come via Sarah Connor, no matter how many weapons she has. It's certainly not going to come through Danny. So it's ultimately going to have to come through a dude. That's why I was dissatisfied with it.
Obviously, they did it so that Arnold would say,
I won't be back.
What was the stupid line where he dropped to the bottom and said, John, whatever.
For John.
Oh, for John.
For John, which was, oh my God. Gah. Anyway.
Yeah, I was disappointed in that, because Grace was, to my mind, to my reading, she was denied the kind of fully dramatic violence, doves flying into the sunset, heroic sacrifice that she deserved. And it was given to, Arnie. And I was mad, because I was she went through all of this, and
if it was
her
taken
death
from
happened.
Grace,
If
it was taken from Grace so that Danny could do it, that would be a different issue. But Danny was able to do the final big thing because Arnold came in, right? Like, it was that ending was very clearly giving him.
It was muted. It was
Sorry?
muted. I said it was muted. And ultimately her sacrifices that she gives up what is, like her heart, her power source, right? But she doesn't do some sort of like final badass thing in the way that we want to see with these movies with, the evil android, the evil cyborg being taken down by the good cyborg. She just, kind of quietly
And they copied
expires.
they recreated the entire goddamn story from scratch. Like they just made the same story again, but that piece they couldn't redo, whatever. Yes, I found that troubling as well. Anyways, are we done with this? Can we be done with this forever?
Well,
Carolyn, you got any last thoughts you want to throw in before we wrap this shit up?
I'm good. I'm good.
All right, y'all. We'll be back with our weekly freakouts.
Hey, Feminist Frequency Radio listeners. We'd love to have you join our Patreon community. Hop on over to patreon.com/femfreak. Do it now!
What's your freak out?
Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Carolyn?
Yo.
What's been feelings? What are your feelings? What are feelings?
What even are feelings? Well, in this 20-hour special segment, I'm freaking out about another film. Definitely a Caro film. So Caro, let me stick the Caro movie warning on the film I'm about to recommend, so that everyone knows what they're getting into and doesn't rush out and see it. But I'm talking about the new film by Almodóvar, which is called Pain and Glory, and this is a film that it's a fascinating film. It stars Antonio Banderas, who is a longtime former Almodóvar collaborator. Like he was in a lot of Almodóvar's early films, but they haven't worked together in decades. And very interestingly, in this film, Antonio Banderas plays a very Almodóvar-like director who kind of reconnects with an actor that he hasn't worked with in decades. So it's got a kind of like meta quality going on. But this is a film that it's quieter, perhaps, than a lot of Almodóvar's kind of earlier films, but it still has very much the depth of feeling that you would expect. It is kind of about aging. But it's also about cinema itself, and it's about artistic creation, and it has a final shot that kind of just adds an entirely new layer of significance to the film. It's a really brilliant final shot in what I think is a really profoundly beautiful film with a really great performance by Antonio Banderas.
Man, I would watch that shit. I actually really like him as a director. Like Voltaire destroyed me.
Yeah. I mean, you might actually. This might be a Caro movie that you would actually like.
Yeah, there are a couple.
Yeah,
it happens occasionally.
Yeah.
All right, Ebony, what's up with you this week?
What's the Almodóvar film where there's a guy who's like a hospital orderly, and then there's the torero who's in a coma.
Right.
Whatever that movie is. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I can't remember what it's called though.
Yeah, that was when I signed off on Pedro.
This film is much more. It's much more like stripped down. It's not like the outrageous, like very very busy cinema of a lot of his films. It's a much quieter film, but it really has layers to it, and it's anyway. I think it's. So if you've been turned off by maybe the excess of some of his previous work, this is not one of those like excessive films.
No, actually, it was not the excess. I love that shit.
Sure.
What turned me off was the suggestion, more than suggestion, in whatever that film was, and I'm blanking on the name, I apologize. But this, hospital worker rapes this woman who's in a coma. She gets pregnant, has the baby, and wakes up from her coma. And there is more than a suggestion that had that not happened, this miraculous thing, her waking up, would not have occurred. And so it's a net good that he has done this. And I was just so grossed out. And I was like, I think I'm done with old Pedro.
Perfectly valid. Perfectly valid. Yes.
So I am freaking out about a newish HBO show called The Righteous Gemstones that stars Danny McBride, John Goodman, a bunch of fabulous people, but also a person like Giancarlo Esposito, like Tim Blake Nelson, like Delroy Lindo. Whenever I see this dude in something, I am always so happy. Walton Goggins.
Oh, I love Walton Goggins.
I know, right? Like, I have never seen him in something and been like, oh, fuck that guy. Or had an opinion that was completely neutral. Like, I absolutely love him. So The Righteous Gemstones is a series that is set in talk about excess, the kind of overblown, hypocritical, self-regarding, self-righteous world of American hyper-evangelism. And, we would, although I don't remember if they have a weekly show or not, televangelism. But it's this religious family that is exceedingly wealthy and has made their wealth on the backs of, the tithes and donations of their flock. That's headed up by a patriarch played by John Goodman. His wife, the matriarch of the film or of the show, has died before the onset of the first series, but her presence lingers on very much. It is exactly the kind of show you would expect that Danny McBride would write, direct, and star in, which is to say that it is often so incredibly funny that you will lose your shit, along with, moments where you're like, yeah, you need a good editor, dude. But whatever. It gets so much right about white American Southern religious culture that the infrequent missteps that it does make are easily forgiven for me. There are just these, oh my God, these pitch perfect notes about that kind of like church atmosphere in these mega churches, and the people swaying to Christian contemporary music, and the clothing, and the constant referencing of Bible verses while doing the most appalling things. It is just hilariously funny sometimes. So that's what I'm freaking out about this week, The Righteous Gemstones.
Nice. I was at Paris Games Week a few weeks ago, and it's an annual conference for French game developers and community. And I was speaking at the Women in Games France evening event that they had there, which is why I was there. But I wanted to just shout out Paris Games Week in general, because there was something that was so distinctly different about this games conference that I've never seen at any other games conference I've been to, or not ever, but to this magnitude. So it's very much like, they have the huge expo halls with the huge booths and all of the stuff you would expect, but they had two separate halls, and one of them was for kids. And it was just as big, and it was just as bold in some, it was big. So for example, on the main expo floor, Nintendo Switch had its huge, massive booth. But on the kids show floor, they had Switch Junior, and they had all of these games for kids, and all of these specifically designed for kids to come and play. In addition to a bunch of video games that young people can come play, there's also playgrounds and competitions and dance competitions and these you can climb the walls and shit. There's all this stuff there. And so there's just hordes of kids that come into this event, which I just found so exciting. My friends in Paris were able to bring their kids to the event in a way that was meant for them, not just the couple of booths that might be for you. So shout out to them for having that. And when I mentioned my surprise, everyone was like, yeah, that's just kind of how it is. And I was like, well, cool.
That is awesome.
So, yeah, I really liked that a lot, and thought, I think oftentimes we get very caught up in games being this like adult thing. I don't like.
Yeah,
does
it's
that sound weird?
No, I mean it's true. Like I think for those of us who have grown up with games, we maybe now see games as being for those of us who have grown up with games and are now adults, and forget about the whole like, you know, games for kids thing, which is should be a huge part of how we think about games.
And some of it might be, you know, like we don't have kids, and so
Right.
we're not
No,
necessarily
sure.
looking at
Good
games.
point.
Well, Ebony kind of has a million, but that's a different story.
That's
but
a
we're not
matter for the
necessarily-
authorities, Nita.
We might not necessarily like be engaging with that, you know, outside of like
Yeah.
Fortnite or whatever. But yeah, I thought that was really nice. The last event that I went to that had something kind of similar was much smaller scale, and it's a games conference in Hamburg, Germany. I'm completely forgetting I think Game Assembly. No, that's a school somewhere. Anyways, they also had like a big area with all of these activities, like hands-on activities for kids to do and learn and play with. And so I like that. I think that we need to, you know, like how cool would it be if like GDC, well, it wouldn't be GDC, but like E3 had a whole area for kids instead of the fucking dumpster fire that it is now. That's my freak out. Thanks so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio, because that's what you've been listening to. Stay tuned for the freaking after party, only available to backers of this podcast, which you can learn more at patreon.com/femfreak. You can find us everywhere great podcasts are found, and if you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review us, because it actually really helps. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and all the social medias at FemFreak. This show is engineered by Rob Pera. Sarah Norales provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Join us next week for another feminist dive into pop culture. And also, we will be at Geek Girl Con next week. So, tune in because we will be airing our live show. But if you're at Geek Girl Con, come and check us out and say hi.
Yay!
All right, y'all. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Later.